Seriously, is this bring your grandpa to work day? The question, sharp and laced with derision, cut through the oppressive afternoon heat. Airman Anderson leaned out from the guard shack, his posture a study in practiced arrogance. He gestured with a contemptuous flick of his wrist toward the simple laminated card Glenn Holmes held in his steady, age-spotted hand. Glenn, a man whose 80 years were etched into the lines around his calm, clear eyes, said nothing. He stood on the pedestrian walkway leading to the main gate of Creech Air Force Base, a lone figure against the shimmering asphalt in the stark, unforgiving landscape of the Nevada desert. The sun beat down, reflecting off the polished insignia on Anderson's uniform and the mirrored sunglasses of his partner, Sergeant Evans, who approached with a slow, deliberate swagger. Evans was the senior man, the one who set the tone, and the tone he had set was one of bored hostility. "Let me see that," Evans demanded, his voice flat. He snatched the badge from Glenn's hand. "Civilian," he grunted, reading the plain black text under the official seal. "What's this even for? Access to the rec center, old-timer?" The two guards stood over Glenn Holmes, a palpable wall of youthful authority and disdain. Glenn was on foot, a deliberate choice, preferring the slow, rhythmic pace of walking to the sterile confines of a car. He had come for the annual memorial dedication, a quiet pilgrimage he made every year. He wore simple khaki trousers and a light blue polo shirt, clothes that spoke of retirement and peace, not of the storms he had weathered. His only adornment was the badge, clipped to his shirt pocket, an object so unassuming it seemed to invite mockery. Sergeant Evans, a man who equated authority with volume, held the badge between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled piece of trash. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some real identification, driver's license, military ID, something that tells me who you are and what you're doing trying to walk onto a secure military installation." The use of the word "sir" was a formality stripped of all respect. Glenn met his gaze, his expression unchanging. He reached into his back pocket and produced a worn leather wallet, extracting his state-issued driver's license. He handed it over. Evans took it, his eyes flicking from the photo to Glenn's face and back again. "Glenn Holmes, born 1945. You've seen a few summers, haven't you, Glenn?" Airman Anderson snickered. "Maybe he's lost, Sarge, looking for the bingo hall." The line of cars waiting to enter the base was beginning to lengthen. A horn blared impatiently in the distance. The heat was relentless, a physical presence that amplified the growing tension at the gate. Evans seemed to feed on it, his contempt solidifying into a more aggressive posture. He held up Glenn's simple badge again. "This civilian badge is a joke. I can make something that looks more official on my home computer. What's it supposed to be for? Special access to the shuffleboard court." Glenn's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet and even, a stark contrast to the guard's abrasive tones. "It was issued to me. It serves its purpose." "Its purpose," Evans scoffed. "And what purpose is that? Getting you a discount at the commissary? Look, old man, this is a restricted area. We're responsible for the security of this entire base. We've got active drone operations here, advanced technology, and thousands of personnel. You can't just wander in off the street with a laminated card and expect us to roll out the red carpet." He tapped the badge against his palm, the rhythmic sound a small insulting punctuation in the heavy air. "For all I know, you're a protester, or a spy, or just a confused old man who doesn't know where he is." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Glenn's calm was a fortress. He had faced down men with far more malice in their hearts than this puffed-up sergeant. He had seen the very worst of humanity, and the very best. This was just noise. But it was persistent, grating noise. The small crowd was growing. A few drivers, their windows down, were now watching the exchange with open curiosity. The humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. "I have an appointment," Glenn stated simply, his patience a deep, unrippled pool. "An appointment," Evans repeated, drawing the words out with theatrical disbelief. "With who?" "The base historian. You want to tell him some war stories." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We get a lot of guys like you. Men who want to relive the glory days. But the world's moved on. The military's moved on. Your time is over. Now, unless you have a valid, current military-issued ID that grants you access to this base, I'm going to have to ask you to turn around and walk away." Glenn did not move. He simply stood there, a silent testament to a history the young guards could not possibly comprehend. His stillness seemed to infuriate Evans more than any argument could have. The sergeant's face was flushed, a mixture of the desert heat and his own rising anger. He felt his authority being challenged, not by defiance but by a quiet dignity he couldn't penetrate. He decided to escalate, to force a reaction, to break the old man's infuriating composure. As Sergeant Evans held the badge up to the light, sneering at its simplicity, the glare off the plastic laminate seemed to trigger something deep within Glenn's memory. The flat, featureless desert of Nevada dissolved, replaced for a heartbeat by the choking dust and swirling chaos of a different desert, half a world away. It was the shriek of a helicopter's rotors, the frantic, desperate sound of a machine fighting to stay alive. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic taste of fear. A younger Glenn, his face grimed with sweat and dirt, was kneeling. Beside him, a man lay on a stretcher, his uniform soaked in blood. The man was gasping, his eyes wide with shock. He was a general, a man who commanded thousands, now as helpless as a child. Around them, chaos reigned. Shouts, explosions, the percussive rhythm of gunfire. In the midst of it all, another man, a younger, grim-faced officer, had leaned in, his voice urgent and strained above the din. He wasn't pinning a medal on Glenn's chest. There was no ceremony, no pomp. He was pressing a freshly made, crudely laminated card into Glenn's hand. "You get whatever you need," the officer had yelled over the rotor wash. "Anywhere, anytime, that's his direct order. You saved him. You saved all of us." The memory was a flash of pure sensory overload, the smell of aviation fuel, the sting of sand in his eyes, the immense weight of the general's life in his hands. It was not a memory of glory, but of grim, bloody necessity. It was the birth of the badge, an object forged not in a factory, but in the crucible of combat. The vision vanished as quickly as it came. Glenn was back at the gate, the Nevada sun beating down on his head. Sergeant Evans was still talking, his words a meaningless drone. The past was a ghost, a secret history locked behind Glenn's calm gaze, a history this arrogant young guard was unwittingly mocking with every word. Stuck in the third car back from the gate was Master Sergeant Cole. He was on his way to a logistics meeting he was already late for, and his initial reaction was pure, unadulterated annoyance. He leaned on his horn, a short, sharp blast that was ignored by the guards. He muttered a curse under his breath, craning his neck to see what the holdup was. He saw the two security airmen posturing in front of a single old man on foot. It was a pathetic display of power, and Cole, a man with 25 years of service, recognized it instantly. He had seen countless young NCOs like Evans, men who mistook their stripes for genuine authority and their rulebooks for wisdom. Cole was about to write it off as just another Monday until he saw the object at the center of the dispute. Even from a distance he could see the simple laminated badge in Sergeant Evans's hand. He had heard whispers about such an object, stories that were told in hushed tones in enlisted clubs and NCO lounges. They were the kinds of stories that blurred the line between fact and legend, tales of a special civilian classification granted for acts of valor so extreme, so far outside the normal channels of recognition, that they required a unique, permanent status. He had always dismissed them as barracks myths. But then he saw the old man's face, his posture, his unyielding calm in the face of such blatant disrespect, and he saw the badge again, plain and unassuming. A cold knot of dread formed in Cole's stomach. What if the legends were true? His training, his instincts, everything he had learned over a quarter-century of service, screamed at him that this was not a situation to be handled with a car horn. This was something far more serious. He reached for his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He didn't call the front gate. That would be useless. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he rarely used, a direct line to the administrative office of the base command chief. He knew he was taking a risk, bypassing the entire chain of command, but he also knew that if his hunch was right, the fallout from this roadside drama could be catastrophic. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Command Chief's office. This is Airman First Class Peters. This is Master Sergeant Cole," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm at the main gate. There's a situation. Security forces are detaining an elderly civilian. I need you to run a name for the chief immediately." He spelled out the name slowly and clearly. "GlennHolmes. "Sir, is this an emergency?" the airman asked, his voice betraying a hint of confusion. "Just run the name," Cole insisted, "and tell the chief this man is carrying a simple laminated civilian badge. That's it. Just tell him that." Cole watched as Sergeant Evans gestured dismissively, forcing Glenn to step back from the gate. The master sergeant felt a surge of anger. He had seen enough. He knew what he had to do. "Patch me through to the general's aide now." The request was so out of the ordinary that the airman on the other end of the line was momentarily stunned into silence. Patching an NCO stuck in traffic directly to the office of the base's commanding general was a breach of protocol of the highest order. But there was a quality in Master Sergeant Cole's voice, a mixture of absolute certainty and barely controlled urgency, that cut through the bureaucratic red tape. The call was transferred. In a sprawling, wood-paneled office in the base headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Richards, the aide-de-camp to General Marcus Thorne, answered the phone with an air of weary efficiency. He listened for less than 10 seconds, his posture straightening with every word. Master Sergeant Cole spoke. The casual demeanor vanished, replaced by a mask of intense concentration. He scribbled a name and a description on a notepad. "Hold," he said, his voice clipped. He stood, walked swiftly across the plush carpet, and entered the general's inner office without knocking. General Thorne, a man whose stern features looked as if they had been carved from granite, looked up from a stack of reports, his annoyance plain. "Richards, what is it?" "I'm in the middle of, sir," Richards interrupted, something he had not done in his 3 years as the general's aide. "A situation at the main gate. A civilian, an elderly man, is being detained by security. His name is Glenn Holmes." The name hit the general like a physical blow. The pen in his hand clattered onto the polished surface of his desk. His face, a moment before a mask of impatience, went pale. He stood up slowly, his eyes locked on his aide. "Glenn Holmes, are you certain?" "That's the name I was given, sir. And one other detail. The man is carrying a simple laminated civilian badge. It's the reason he's being detained. The guards think it's a fake." General Thorne stared at his aide, but his gaze was distant, looking back across decades. He saw a dusty, chaotic airfield, heard the scream of incoming mortars, and felt the searing pain in his own leg. He saw a quiet civilian engineer, a man with no obligation to be there, running toward the danger, not away from it. He saw Glenn Holmes. "Get me the chief of security." The general's voice was a low growl filled with a cold fury that made Lieutenant Colonel Richards flinch. "Get the base commander. Tell them to meet me at the main gate. Now, and get my convoy ready. We are leaving this second." He was already moving, grabbing his formal service hat from its stand, his movements precise and filled with a terrible, contained energy. The base was about to learn a lesson in history and humility, delivered personally by its commanding officer. Back at the gate, Sergeant Evans was reaching the end of his patience. The old man's quiet refusal to be intimidated or provoked had worn through his thin veneer of professionalism. This was no longer about security, it was about ego. He saw the growing line of cars, felt the eyes of the waiting drivers, and interpreted Glenn's stoicism as a direct challenge to his authority. He decided to end it. "All right, I've had enough of this," Evans announced, his voice rising in volume. "You've been given a lawful order to present valid identification, and you failed to comply. You're refusing to leave a restricted federal installation. I'm placing you under detainment pending a full identity verification and a threat assessment." He reached for his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back." Airman Anderson, sensing the escalation, shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively closer to his sidearm. He was young and inexperienced, caught up in the momentum of his superior's misguided aggression. "Sir," Evans barked, his face inches from Glenn's. "Did you hear me? Hands behind your back. Now, or we will use the necessary force to ensure compliance." He made a final, arrogant threat, a decision that would echo through the rest of his career. "And after we're done here, we're going to get you a full medical and psychological evaluation. Clearly you're not all there." It was the ultimate insult, the final overreach, spoken just as the first siren became audible in the distance. The sound was faint at first, a rising wail that cut through the desert silence. Evans paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. The siren grew louder, closer, joined by a second, then a third. It was not the sound of a routine patrol. It was the urgent, piercing scream of a high-priority escort. Down the long, straight road leading from the heart of the base, a column of vehicles appeared, moving at a speed that was both reckless and precise. At the lead were 3 security forces patrol cars, their lights flashing in a frantic red and blue rhythm. Behind them 2 gleaming black SUVs, the kind reserved for high-ranking officials, fishtailed slightly as they braked, coming to a screeching halt just yards from the gate. The sudden dramatic arrival sent a wave of confusion and alarm through the waiting line of cars. Doors flew open on the official vehicles. The base chief of security, a man with eagles on his collar and a thunderous expression on his face, emerged from the first SUV. From the second, striding with a purpose that seemed to shake the very ground, came General Marcus Thorne. The sensory impact was overwhelming. The wail of the sirens, the slamming of car doors, the sight of the base's highest-ranking officer arriving in a full-blown motorcade. It was a scene of such jarring importance that it rendered everything else silent and still. Sergeant Evans and Airman Anderson froze, their hands hovering uselessly in the air, their faces a comical mixture of shock and terror. The power dynamic at the gate had not just been inverted, it had been obliterated. General Thorne ignored the 2 dumbstruck guards. He ignored his own chief of security. His eyes, filled with an emotion that no one present had ever seen him display, were fixed on one person only, Glenn Holmes. He walked directly toward the old man, his polished black boots crunching on the gravel at the side of the road. The crowd, now completely captivated, watched in stunned silence. The base commander, a full colonel who had arrived in the convoy, looked as if he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. The general stopped a single pace in front of Glenn. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that spanned 40 years and a world of shared experience. Then General Thorne, the commander of one of the most advanced military installations on the planet, a man who reported directly to the Pentagon, drew himself up to his full height. His back went ramrod straight. His arm snapped up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect. Holding the salute, General Thorne's voice boomed across the now silent checkpoint, each word a hammer blow of truth. Glenn Holmes, civilian engineer, attached to the 7th Air Division, 1983. During a surprise enemy mortar attack on our forward operating base, then Captain Thorne was critically wounded, his command team incapacitated, and our primary communication lines severed. The general's eyes never left Glenn's. With complete disregard for his own safety, Mr. Holmes ran across 100 yards of open ground under direct fire to render aid to Captain Thorne. He then single-handedly restored our communications, allowing us to call for air support and medical evacuation, saving the lives of not only his commanding officer but 17 other wounded soldiers. He finally lowered his salute, but his gaze remained locked on Glenn. That action was above and beyond the call of duty. Because Mr. Holmes was a civilian, he was not eligible for the Medal of Honor. Therefore, by the direct authority of the Secretary of the Air Force, he was issued a permanent Class 1 civilian citation. That badge, the general said, turning a withering glare on the ashen-faced Sergeant Evans, is the equivalent of a general officer's open credentials. It grants Mr. Holmes unrestricted access to any United States Air Force installation in the world at any time. It is a symbol of a debt that can never truly be repaid. A ripple of awe and understanding passed through the crowd of onlookers. Car doors opened as people got out to get a better look at the unassuming hero in their midst. Phones were raised, recording the incredible scene. Master Sergeant Cole, watching from his car, felt a profound sense of vindication. The legend was real, and he was standing right there. Sergeant Evans, still holding the now sacred badge, looked as if he might faint. The piece of plastic in his hand felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. The general turned his attention to Sergeant Evans and Airman Anderson. His voice dropped, losing its booming public quality and taking on a dangerously quiet edge that was far more terrifying. You stand here today wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force. That uniform does not belong to you. You borrow it, and you have a sacred duty to honor the legacy of those who wore it before you. You are guardians, not bullies. Your job is to tell friend from foe, and you have failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over the two men. You looked at this man and saw his age. You failed to see his honor. You saw a simple piece of plastic and failed to see the courage it represents. You will report to my office in full dress uniform at 0600 tomorrow. You are going to learn what it means to respect your elders and the heroes who have built the very institution you so casually disrespect. He turned his back on them, a gesture of complete dismissal. He faced Glenn again, his expression softening. Glenn, I am so sorry. I am embarrassed and deeply ashamed of the welcome you received today. Glenn Holmes finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet wisdom of his years. He placed a gentle hand on the general's arm. Marcus, he said, the use of the first name a clear indicator of their deep personal bond. They're just children. They don't know. The only way they learn is if someone teaches them. Don't break them. Teach them. As Glenn uttered those words of grace, the scene flickered again in his mind. Another echo from the past, clearer this time. He was on a stretcher, being loaded onto a medevac helicopter. The young wounded Captain Thorne was on the stretcher next to him. Before they were lifted into the belly of the roaring machine, a grim-faced colonel had leaned in, pressing the newly minted badge into Glenn's hand. The general insisted. The colonel had said over the noise. He said courage doesn't wear a uniform. That moment, born of chaos and gratitude, was the true origin of the object, a symbol not of authority but of a shared humanity in the face of death. It was a lesson the young guards at the gate were only just beginning to learn. The fallout from the incident at the main gate was swift and decisive. Sergeant Evans and Airman Anderson were not broken as Glenn had requested, but they were comprehensively re-educated. They spent a week under the direct supervision of Master Sergeant Cole, who was tasked with their remedial training. Their days were filled not with punishment, but with study. They learned about military history, about the unwritten codes of conduct, and about the valor of civilians who had served alongside uniformed personnel in every conflict in the nation's history. They wrote a formal letter of apology to Glenn Holmes, an exercise in humility that both men found more challenging than any physical task. The base command implemented a new training module for all security personnel, titled the Holmes Protocol, focusing on verification procedures for non-standard credentials and emphasizing de-escalation and respect. General Thorne made a personal, formal apology to Glenn on behalf of the entire installation during the memorial dedication ceremony, sharing the story of Glenn's heroism with a new generation of airmen. Weeks later, a humbled and changed Sergeant Evans was at a small diner off base, picking up a takeout order. He saw Glenn Holmes sitting alone in a booth, slowly stirring a cup of coffee. After a moment of profound hesitation, Evans walked over. He stood at the edge of the table, his uniform crisp, his posture no longer arrogant but respectful. "Mr. Holmes," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, in person, I am truly sorry for my conduct. There is no excuse. You were right. I needed to be taught." Glenn looked up from his coffee, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit down, son," he said, his voice kind. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee." Evans sat, and for the next hour, the old hero and the young sergeant simply talked, bridging the gap between generations with a shared understanding of duty and a newfound respect. If you were moved by Glenn's story of quiet courage, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more tales of unassuming heroes.